Now you're listening to Fantastic Formosa with Joh Abrams in Taipei. Hey, welcome back to Fantastic Formosa. I'm Joh Abrams, and we have a returning guest, Keith Perron, who it's actually pronounced Perron, I guess. What is it? Perron?
Perron, yeah, in English. I'm like a bad head cold. I just kind of keep returning.
And, a lot of folks in Taiwan and elsewhere in Asia are trying to create their own little studio for radio and maybe even video. And some of this is for hobbies. Some of it, they want to have bigger dreams. They want to make money from doing that. And these sort of podcasts appear on YouTube. They appear on Substack if you want to make money. And another one's Patreon, I believe. Is that another one? What are there, what we call areas that you can, broadcast?
Well, for distributing a podcast, people do make money, by the way, also from YouTube.
Oh, but it has to be huge, right?
You have to have a huge audience. There's YouTube, Substack. Patreon kind of works with Substack and YouTube. People do it through Instagram. People do it through Facebook. People do it through Discord. People do it through Twitch. People do it through. I think I maybe left a couple of out. So, but those are the main platforms, and they all kind of have their. They have their positives and they have their negatives, depending on who you want as an audience.
Right. Well, I have a lot of friends that say Substack is the future. A lot of former journalists, particularly a few New York Times people, have switched over to Substack and made an incredible career. But they had big names before they started.
That's what helps. A big mistake that a lot of people make when coming up with an idea for a podcast is they're thinking, especially if you're unknown. If you're unknown, they think, I see all these people with like 2 million, 3 million, 5 million subscribers and viewers, because today podcasts are not just audio, but they're also video. That isn't going to happen unless you're very lucky and unless you have something really special that isn't already out there.
Yeah, something niche. A niche, right?
Yeah,
something
you have to kind of and sometimes it's like I said, it's luck.
Yeah.
It's just really, it's lucky.
Well, the problem, I think, for many people are, particularly in Taiwan, we have a lot of people here that have, basically a fantastic Formosa. They go to the mountains, they go hiking, they love the country, and there's too many of these, I think, on Substack. When I Google that stuff on Substack, wow, and that's true in other parts of Asia, I'm sure.
Well, you see, this is the thing that I have noticed. And it just isn't just in Taiwan's case, but also others as well. But we'll use, let's say, Taiwan as an example here. If I go to Substack or any of these other platforms, even YouTube, right, and put a search for a specific topic about Taiwan, either culturally or politically or whatever it is, I would just get page after page after page after page of exactly the same thing and with the exact same message, and nothing is standing out. And what happens with that is that it's sort of like you could have an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and if you put 1 teaspoon of arsenic into the pool, it's not going to damage the water.
Right.
So it just gets lost in this vast wasteland.
So that 1 teaspoon of arsenic poison doesn't do anything.
Doesn't do anything. So and this is the same with so many different topics that you see across different platforms with podcasts. It's not, people think that, you just do a podcast and you come up with something, but it isn't that simple. It isn't that simple, but people, let's say, that don't come from a broadcasting background or a journalism background know that isn't the case.
Right. Yes. People like yourself, of course, who've been in radio since and doing documentaries for BBC, I guess, and others, right?
And others, yeah.
How many? Back to the 80s, right?
Starting in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, so you have this tremendous amount of experience and wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and we're going to talk about podcasts tonight, and we're going to discuss how you, the listener, might be able to create something, and to be honest with yourself about, you may not make any money, but you might enjoy it as a hobby, maybe. You learn something about yourself. You learn about new skill sets about how to project your voice, for example, like I do not. And how did this whole podcast thing get started?
Well, if we look at the radio landscape or the media landscape in general, both radio and television, in the 2000s, it really started to change. Internet speeds got faster, and a lot of international broadcasters, like the BBC and others, were dropping certain services going to the internet. This is before what we see today, right? I mean, even at Radio Netherlands, we started doing it in the 1990s. Everybody thought we were crazy. Because we only had like 15 listeners in 1994 for a podcast, using a really what we consider today as outdated audio software. But it showed that what you can do. And then around probably between 2007, 2009, or I'll push it to 2010, there was this gigantic boom in podcasting because equipment became cheaper. People can do it at home. Easy to get equipment. The internet was becoming stable. But if you go back, say, 16 years now, or 17 years, and look at all those podcasts that began then, probably less than 1.5% of them are still around today.
Wow.
There were other platforms. Substack wasn't around. There was one service that was called Stitcher, Stitcher Smart Radio. That vanished a few years ago because technology has changed so fast that what was good then, unless you update it and make changes, it's going to become out of date really quickly. And back then, the idea of making money from a podcast, unless you had the support of a large media group behind you or a broadcaster, but as an independent to make money from it was just impossible. Because if you wanted to, say, get advertising or sponsorship, right? An advertising agency would say, well, wait a second, how many listeners do you have? How old are they? How long do they listen? And what, only 1,000 listeners? No, we're not interested in that. Back then, around that time, if you said you had 2,000 listeners or 3,000 listeners, people would be amazed.
Right.
But today, that's practically nothing.
Wow. Yeah. Agreed. When you see these hits on YouTube for some of these videos, millions of people are watching.
Well, with the views that you get on YouTube, you sort of have to take with a grain of salt.
A grain of salt means what?
A grain of salt meaning, yes, you could take the number, but probably if you look further into it, it's not actually that number.
Right. Okay, that's a common phrase in English, grain of salt. Go ahead.
The reason being, because if you see it says a video, let's say, has 1.2 million views or 3 million views.
Right.
Does that mean people watch the whole 10 minutes or 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Or they just watch 10 seconds and went on board and they move on to something else?
Yeah, you need that data.
You need that data.
Analytics, right?
Yeah.
How do you get those analytics on YouTube? Do they give it to you?
Oh, yeah. You just go into a thing called YouTube Studio and you can click on analytics and it will give a lot of details. For example, like where the views are mainly coming from, sometimes country, sometimes even down to city.
Right.
Age range. Gender and so on and so on.
Wow.
See, you can get that information.
The demographics.
Yeah, and demographics are key to people doing podcasts today. because back then it was really the wild, wild west. And there's some of the good ones have remained. A friend of mine, Peter Anthony Holder, he did a show for almost 25 years called The Peter Anthony Holder Show. Mm-hmm. When the radio station that he was working at was sold to another group, they canceled his show, but he continued it as he just had to use a different name of the show. Right. He called it The Stuff File with Peter Anthony Holder.
I see.
And that show has continued, I think only with an interruption of 2 weeks. He was one of the... it started off with no advertising, nothing, and then over 5 years started building it up. He already had a name for himself in commercial radio and public radio.
Right.
Another one that I can think of would be Joe Rogan.
Oh, my God. Joe Rogan, if you don't know who that is, he is, I think, the number one. Is he on Patreon? Where is he?
He's one of the number one out there. He's on Spotify.
They paid him how much to be...
Millions.
Millions just to move his program over to Spotify.
Yeah, but it's still available on YouTube. Right.
Well, yeah, you'll see parts of it. Yeah. He's basically for men, I think, young men, and he has sort of a wildness about him. He was a mixed martial arts guy for a long time.
Stand-up comedian, actor.
He was a comedian and actor. So he knows how to talk to people in a very humorous and unconventional way as well.
Right. But I mean, he's been around a lot longer than people may think. And if you go back and watch when Joe Rogan started the Joe Rogan podcast all those years ago, they're rubbish.
Oh, yeah.
They were just rubbish.
Right.
They're just really absolutely horrible. So it has changed a lot.
Right.
Today it's a lot easier to get advertising and sponsorship than it was. It's still difficult. Because what we know is, let's say, legacy media, terrestrial, AM, FM, television, and so on,
New York Times,
that still has a lot of power.
Right, CNN, legacy media.
So this new stuff is still a little bit tricky because it still hasn't matured yet. And it's because it's forever changing. It changes so quickly.
Because of the technology.
And how people listen. That it's still difficult. It's a lot easier than it was, but it still is challenging, and very challenging if you're unknown. If you're a known personality, no problem. But if you're an unknown, it is really challenging.
Right. Well, Spotify is another one you should look at, folks. Spotify, Substack, Patreon, I think, are the three big ones, I think. YouTube is big, but money-wise, you don't get anything.
Depends.
It has to be a lot of people, million maybe.
Well, not just that, but all this stuff it just depends.
Right.
Because, for example, on YouTube, I have come across creators that produce excellent content, not just from a production value, but also just in general, excellent content. And maybe they have like 10 subscribers. And then you can have somebody else who produces, from a production standpoint, horrible stuff, very choppy, and they have millions. And this has to do with how the algorithm for YouTube is changing. What the trend has been, and this has been looked at by a number of people, YouTube now is really pushing YouTube Shorts, videos of, let's say, 1 minute.
I'm tired of them, actually. They're very annoying.
They're very annoying. But the problem is, those short videos of 1 minute, right? Channels that only produce short videos are getting now way more subscribers than channels that are producing long content, meaning 10 minutes, 30 minutes to 1 hour.
Right.
And the short stuff, not all of it, but a lot of it, I would probably say at least 90% of it, are from companies like, well, there's one called So Yummy. So Yummy, 5 Minute Crafts.
Yummy.
Yeah.
Yummy
5 Minute Crafts, all these like weird hacking channels. And they're dangerous because they show things that are really dangerous. I can give you one example.
How to break into someone's email, maybe, or
no. It's not that kind of hacking. It's about like food hacks.
Oh.
And the So Yummy had a video that they took down and then put it up on one. It's a company that owns this one channel, but they have 400 channels on YouTube.
What? Okay.
It's a big group.
So,
they're based in Russia.
All right.
And they put up this video saying, and the videos that are targeting kids, right? Mm-hmm. What do you do if you want white strawberries for your ice cream? And kid you not, put them in a bowl, pour bleach in them, just rinse them off, and then they're white strawberries, and then they put it on ice cream. These are the kind of content they were producing.
Bleach is extremely dangerous.
And it's not the only one. It's not they show like life, quote unquote, life hacks. There's a woman by the name of Anne Reardon. Mm. She's in Australia. She's a dietitian, and she's been on this. She has a very popular channel called How to Cook That, and she does a lot of debunking of these videos.
Oh, good. So she's got an audience.
Yeah, and her husband is a former journalist, retired journalist, and he does all the research. Where are these people based? Where are these companies based?
Crazy people.
And they're based out of Russia. Some of them are based out of Thailand, and some of these companies that produce these quote unquote life hacking videos have 400 channels or more in about 30 different languages.
All right. So they're just going for the long tail. We call it in economics. They get they buy. It's kind of like a wave, and it just goes up and up and up as you get so many subscribers for 400 different videos. So it might not, one video might have 2,000 subscriptions, but if you have 400 of these things.
No, the problem though is that their channels. You go through them, have like 3 million subscribers each.
Who's subscribing to this crap?
I mean, that's the spooky thing.
You can't sue anybody in Russia. That's a problem.
And the problem is because they generate so much money. She has had videos taken down. Anne Reardon has had videos taken down off YouTube
because of YouTube complaints.
Well, she complained. And her and her husband provided all the facts to YouTube.
Oh, they won't listen.
And they eventually took it down.
All right.
But then what happens, they take it down.
Yeah.
And then the same company uploads it on one of their other channels.
Yeah, they're not, they're just change the name and repaste it. Yeah. You mentioned the word algorithm earlier. This is a word that everyone knows, I hope. But an algorithm is a computer like software program that identifies you as someone who is a certain age, and maybe you like the color blue, and maybe you like to go hunting, and all of a sudden you get advertisements for blue-colored hunting equipment.
Well, the thing about algorithms is I mean, I remember I was being taught, look, we live in a global world, we all come together, right?
Right.
Black, white, gender, it doesn't matter. But what algorithms do, all of a sudden put a bubble around you. They put a bubble around you.
Right.
And then you're completely in a bubble of any other type of reality that's out there. I mean, that's why we see a lot of partisanship now
with
riots, everything.
The
right?
Rioting.
It's down to the algorithms. And for example, I remember one time on YouTube, I was looking up a video. I have a turtle, and I was looking up some.
You do have a turtle. I want to make this clear that this is not a.
No, this is true. And I was looking up some information on a particular that my turtle had a certain problem. I did one video, and I found it, and all of a sudden, for the next 2 weeks, turtle videos kept popping up on my feed. I'm like, I'm not interested already.
I am very careful about what I click on anymore, because I know that I'm going to receive. They know exactly how old I am. They know that I'm a white male. They know that I like to read about spy novels. And they know that, I don't know, for some reason, I get a lot of conspiracy videos.
Well, the other weird thing, and the thing is about algorithms, they're dangerous sometimes. So I was looking up, I was looking at some very well-known Yiddish comedians, some well-known Yiddish and Jewish comedians. Yiddish
is Hebrew-German language that's
right.
Pretty much dead, but some people speak it.
You still find it in some parts of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
New York City.
Pretty rare, but still.
And I was looking at comedians like Jackie Mason and many others.
Going way
and you
back.
know what happened? It was the weirdest thing. I was looking this up, and all of a sudden, in my feed, I started getting very pro-Nazi stuff. And I'm thinking, wait a second here. Just because I looked up some Jewish comedians already?
I got some Nazi stuff and what?
Yeah.
What's the connection?
I have no idea, but that's the algorithms. This is,
Well, I find what I get annoyed by Google's algorithms are getting very strange. If I Google my name, I'm receiving some very weird hits. But I also noticed that things are disappearing. Things that I contributed to or did during projects 20 years ago are vanishing. So we have something called the Wayback Machine.
I was just going to mention that, yes.
The Wayback Machine is a website that collects a lot of these old websites, and you can still find your old material.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, it can be, you never know. And now you have to pay for it, I think, in some cases.
The last time I used it last week, I still didn't have to pay for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm an older writer, and a lot of my material is still in libraries from the 1980s and early 1990s. So it is collecting dust.
I have a little funny anecdote.
Anecdote is what is an anecdote for our listeners?
An anecdote would be a funny little story.
Yeah, okay, great.
And this is from, it is one of my favorite stories. And it was from a stage production that was done in the 1960s. And they did 2 albums. One is You Don't Have to Be Jewish. And the second one they did is called The Whole World Is, If You're Jewish, The Whole World Is Smiling. It was 2 stage productions.
Weird.
By the same guy who created the parody of the John F. Kennedy Family from an album that came out a few years earlier that won a Grammy and everything. It's quite it's
parody.
What is
a parody?
Parody is you take a real life situation. It's like doing a cartoon. You take I draw a cartoon of you, and I put gigantic big ears and a funny mustache and a big nose. Oh, wait a second, you have funny big ears, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Exaggerating. And a parody of a play or movie. There are movie parodies even of
Mel Brooks does that.
Mel Brooks does that, and I think Taiwan also has a lot of parodies about political figures. They used to do a puppet show.
Satire, yeah.
Satire is another word you can use for parody sometimes. Satire, Satire. Look it up, folks.
But I have this little funny anecdote story that I think it will translate well, and I think you'll find it funny. So one day, there's this old man, 75 years old, and he goes to his doctor, and his doctor says, Mr. Goldstein, why are you here? And he says, listen, my wife is trying to kill me. And his doctor says, Mr. Goldstein, you've been married for 45 years. Why is your wife trying to kill you? And he says, I go to the kitchen. She's hiding rat poison. She's hiding all kinds of things, cyanide. She wants to kill me. And his doctor says, Mr. Goldstein, you're imagining it. Go home and have some chicken soup and relax. A week later, Mr. Goldstein goes back to his doctor and he says, Doctor, my wife is really trying to kill me. She was coming at me with a toaster and I was taking a bath and it looked like she was going to drop it into the bathtub. And he said, no, you're imagining things. Your wife is not trying to kill you. So his doctor says, Mr. Goldstein, listen, let me go and talk to your wife and I'll find out what's going on. A few days go by. Mr. Goldstein goes back to his doctor friend. And he says, so doctor, is my wife trying to kill me? And his doctor says, Mr. Goldstein, I guarantee, I state my medical license on it. I swear on my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my mother, my father, my whole family. Your wife is not trying to kill you. I spent 5 hours with your wife. She's not trying to kill you. And after 5 hours, I can say one thing. Take the poison. It's a silly little thing, but...
Yeah. Now, that's more of a joke than an antidote, isn't it?
Well, I heard that from a podcast called The Joys of Yiddish Humor.
All right. That's an old-fashioned Jewish joke, yes. We have these, the Jews have these kinds of jokes all the time, and they're quite funny. Antidotes, though, sorry, I mispronounced it. You pronounce it how?
Anecdotes.
And you spell it?
Oh my word! You're asking me?
Yeah.
A-N... Wait.
D?
You see, this is the amazing thing about modern technology, because it's a word that I don't use very much. So if I say anecdotes...
Yeah. Sounds like a...
A-N-E-C-O... A-N-E-C-D-O-T-E-S.
Right. Okay, so it doesn't sound like the word you pronounce, though.
No.
So I didn't want people to confuse that with the medical term antidote to your problem. Sometimes you can even say that, someone will tell me somewhat of a little unbelievable story about themselves, and you can respond in a rude way. Oh, that's a cute antidote. And they're like...
Anecdote.
Yeah, you're basically saying that you don't believe them, and it can be a little rude to say that to them, but maybe they've told that story 20 times already, and you're tired of it or something, and so, yeah, you'll hear that story quite a bit. You'll hear that phrase, that word every once in a while. So my biggest fear, though, is I have a little podcast. I won't say what it is, but, my fear is that my material will eventually disappear. At some point in 10, 15, 20 years, you'll no longer be able to find my material. It'll vanish. The company will go out of business. The data will be erased. And so I do some very unique things, and it's a sad way to, I don't know, am I being paranoid?
Well, I would have to say yes and no. The people that ask me if they want to start a podcast, one thing I will tell them is keep everything, save everything, put it up on multiple platforms. Because if you just put it up, for example, we were talking earlier at the beginning about one called Stitcher Smart Radio.
Right.
If you'd uploaded anything on Stitcher and didn't have a backup, forget it. It's all gone. It's all gone.
Right.
So there's websites that are pretty good at archiving stuff. The one you mentioned, the Wayback Machine, which is archive.org. A lot of people will archive stuff there.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of people do. There's another one called radioforall.net. So there's always a cyber version of it somewhere. And then, of course, just keeping a copy yourself, right, on a hard drive.
Yeah, I'm thinking about later in my life when I might not be here, where my children's children might want to listen to something, their grandfather did. But you're right. Maybe I should put it on YouTube. But YouTube is getting very strange about their cancellation policies, depending on who's in power in the White House or even in Beijing, other countries.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I have not. The only people I've come across who have had issues, right? It's because I kind of felt that perhaps they were pushing to have an issue so they can get some notoriety.
Being canceled.
Yeah, to get pushed to another platform to get some attention on them. Because people that I've seen do this, I'm like, well, wait a second. I can find 20,000 or 200, whatever. How many other videos of other people doing exactly the same thing, and they're going after you? I'm like, well, wait a minute here. You know?
Well, journalists used to have this sort of honor, Purple Heart, if they were expelled from a country. So they would often, as they get close to the end of their period of time that they had to cover a subject, cover a country, for example, in the last 6 weeks, they would start writing more honest reports, and then they would get expelled or denied what we call persona non grata, never return. And that would sort of be a badge of honor, even though...
well, not just journalists, politicians as well, who, let's say, it comes to the end of their term, right? And they know they can't run another term, or they know they're going to lose an election. They do exactly the same thing. I think everybody does.
Right, okay. Went down in flames.
Yeah.
Sacrificed myself to the greater good. Yes, of course. We're going to have to do some interesting things here that... Well, I'll be honest with you. I didn't write these because I'm not the expert. Keith is.
I don't like the term expert.
All right. Well, let's just say that since the 1980s...
I'm knowledgeable about it, but...
since the 1980s, Keith is I don't know anybody who has had more experience who's still alive. So
Who says I'm alive now? This is a ghost.
this is a 10-point guide to starting your own podcast or radio show. Point 1, I'll go ahead and read this. You have a concept or an idea. Don't be too over ambitious.
Right. Now, this 10 points is from a presentation that I did a few years ago, and I've condensed it for today.
Okay.
Point 1, like you said, concept and idea. You kind of have to think, well, because some people think, oh, I want to do a podcast. Then I would say, well, what kind of podcast? How are you going to sell this idea? What is going to be special between you and the other 2 million out there, right? And don't be over ambitious.
Right.
The best way, start off small. And I say that because if you've never done radio before, or television for that matter, start off small. You can make all the mistakes you want, and nobody's going to bat an eye.
Bat an eye means what?
Bat an eye meaning nobody's going to pay attention.
Right.
But if you go in there with very overly ambitious ideas, and this is the way you're pushing yourself, people are going to scrutinize you a lot more.
They're gonna criticize you, study you more, and yeah.
So you really just come up with an idea, a concept, and there's so many that you can choose from. But if you're going to do that, try to think of something that is different. Because, like I said, you're trying to distinguish yourself from the other 3 million or 10 million, how many million out there, right? So if it's just you and you do the same as everybody else, you're just going to get lost in a lot of white noise.
Right. Yeah, the white noise phrase means that it's basically, well, it's the same concept of a white wall. You're not going to be noticed if you're a small dot, right?
Yeah, nobody's going to notice you. And sometimes even if you are a well-known personality, nobody is going to know you, right?
Yeah.
So this leads me then to the point 2. Do a bit of research.
Absolutely.
And
we're talking about technical research?
Well, first research on, if you have an idea, research the idea.
Right.
How many people do you think it'll reach? Are you just doing it for fun? If you're doing it for fun, that's fine. But if you're doing it thinking, oh, I want to try to make some money from here, try to get a name for myself, you have to do research.
Right, right.
And research is really going on the internet, and there's a ton of information that you can read from people that have done it before, and different companies that do that distribute. That do the distribution for podcasts. So the information is out there. You just have to do the research. And that'll help you as well come up with an idea or concept that would be different.
Okay.
Which, of course, leads to point 3, how to create something from an idea from research. So you could say the first 3 are kind of together. And that is vitally important, because you can have the greatest idea in the world. But if you're the only one who's interested in it, forget it.
Yeah.
So some interesting podcasts that are appearing, that have appeared on both for video and audio, are things like, maybe if you're not interested in it, a lot of people are not, but say model trains, right? A lot of people are not interested in model trains, but there's a sizable enough community that they actually have their own little niche. And some of these podcasters that do these programs on model trains are quite interesting, because even if you're not a model train enthusiast, you can still listen in and enjoy it.
Yeah, but how many people might attempt to create a model train podcast, and then you got that white noise problem again?
Well, you see, the thing is, all of them, every single one out there, are so incredibly different. There's not that many of them, right? But they are so incredibly different. I can give you just some examples. One of them focuses on how to do your layout, how to do the electrical wiring of your layout, what kind of companies provide the materials, the trains themselves, how to take apart the train and rebuild it, cleaning the interiors so the train runs smoothly.
Right.
The differences between a digitally run model layout to an analog model layout. So they're really all focusing on so many different things. There is, of course, some overlapping because it is a small niche and a small community. There is some overlapping, but the overlapping doesn't put them in a position where it's all dead.
Right. Okay. The interest, let's use an example like Star Trek, which is just out of control. I mean, there are
Star Trek is not the worst one. I would say Doctor Who is this.
Really?
Doctor Who and Star Trek together, but
so how does one ever make any money on a Star Trek podcast?
well, you see, it depends. The ones who've been around for a long time, the ones that have the ones that make money from it are the ones that have access to, let's say, William Shatner.
Oh yeah,
that have access to
have built a relationship with
the warehouses where they keep where they kept the props and the sets and some of the crews that work on it. These are the ones that are or ones that have access, let's say, to clips that have never been, or scripts that were never used.
Right.
These are the ones that, of course, everybody listens to and they make money. Yeah, but these they're not they're the fans, but they're at the same time they are doing something that is interesting other than 3 Star Trek goofballs sitting around saying, "I saw Spock and his ears were crooked." I mean,
Right. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Star Trek, it's an old 1960s sci-fi space show that has...
Well, that's the original series. Don't forget, it's still today.
Yeah, it's still today, and it has, as now today, there's so many different shows based on the original one that it's confusing for me as the original guy. I used to be an original watcher in the 60s, and it was actually canceled after 3 years because of ratings. Nobody cared for it at all.
No, it did better in syndication.
It did. Oh yeah.
Here's a little bit of, this is me being a science fiction geek, but Star Trek, who is to thank for getting that show on the air?
Martin Luther King.
No.
Okay.
One person.
Well, Gene Roddenberry.
No. Well, he's the creator. But for getting it on the air, Desi Arnaz.
Oh, really? You're right. I remember seeing something about that.
Yeah. Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy had their own production company called Desilu,
right,
which produced the series. And Desi Arnaz was so enthusiastic about it. He was the one that pushed the series to finally get sold to NBC.
Amazing.
Yeah.
They were the first mixed couple on TV.
Yep.
And nobody noticed. Nobody complained. He was from Cuba, a Cuban, and she was a redhead from New York or something like that.
Yeah.
Point 4. Those who have never done radio or television, and even if they have, depending on the person, make a pilot with a script and rundown. What's a rundown?
A rundown is if you're going to go into the studio and do something, you have a schedule. So you know this part will be 15 minutes, this part will be 10 minutes. You know where to fade in stuff, you know where to fade out stuff. Just so if you've never done it, or there's people that I know that work in radio that only ever worked in front of the microphone, that if you ask them to produce something, they'll go, they have no idea. They really have no idea.
That's me. That's me.
So it's really organizing yourself. So to make a pilot, right, and you script it, is just a way that you can see how is it going to sound? What is it really going to sound like?
Right.
And the good thing with that is that you can make changes.
Yes.
And a pilot is always good because you can actually soundboard it off friends and say, can you listen to this?
Right.
I want your honest opinion.
Like you have for me.
Yeah.
You've been very helpful.
You soundboard it. And if they say it's rubbish, you ask them why. Well, I don't like this, that, and the other. And you go, okay, well, let me take that idea that I had and let me tweak it around, try to do it in a different way. And scripting, the only reason why I say scripting.
Now, script is it's like a movie script or whatever. Go
Right.
ahead.
The only reason why I say script it, you don't have to stick to it. But sadly, people think that going in front of a microphone and speaking is easy. Okay, it's easy for me, and I can do it without looking at any script, and I can talk nonstop for 3 hours, no problem.
That's true, folks.
Yeah, but a lot of people, they find that difficult. And also, if you're going to be working from a script, reading the script just as if you're speaking at the same time also helps. It keeps your ideas focused and on track. If you think that you could do it without a script, you could just make key points and then ad lib or off the cuff.
Ad lib means just you just use your own creativity suddenly to do something, to ask a question.
I mean, for me, it's easy. I mean, I remember one circumstance when I was on doing News Shift, and this is in the days before we had the internet, and news text would come in from a teletype machine, and there was a problem somewhere with it, and it was in French, and I was reading the bulletin in English, and they were handing me stuff in French from a teletype machine, and I was at the same time reading it in French but saying it in English.
Oh, okay. What a talent.
Tricky. I made a few mistakes on it, but I think I covered it up well. But my point is that scripted, so at least you know what you're talking about.
Right. Well, Dean, I recently had a problem. My last podcast, I turned on the wrong microphone, and no one could hear me very well. But the other guest was perfect. And I thought, oh, my God, here's another lesson I learned.
You can save that.
Yeah, I could have said that in the beginning.
No. You could have saved the whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
All you have to do, and I've done this before, is, okay, your microphone is, let's say, good. Mine isn't. I go back and I just do all my parts again and then edit it together.
Well, I'm not that sophisticated. I'm still learning the editing process, and I don't know if you saw my last podcast, but I added photographs. So I'm learning to do photographs now that were a big hit because people didn't know who we were talking about. And I had no clue what these phrases meant, these acronyms about spies and stuff really meant. We talked about the farm, which is a CIA base for training. So you had to show pictures of the farm and that is a real place and stuff. Number 5, and then we'll take probably a break, and then we'll go to another, and we'll finish the other 5. Point 5, fine-tune the pilot. Now, what is a pilot?
A pilot is something that was very common, and still is today, in television,
right,
and also in radio. Is if they're going to commission a new series, they will say, okay, you have a certain budget, make one example to us, how it would be seen.
Right.
Because from a script, you usually cannot tell.
Right.
So a pilot is done as a sample. And sometimes more than one pilot is done. Sometimes there's one pilot, and they go, well, the show works, but the cast doesn't work together. So let's bring in a different cast or a different presenter and redo it again. And then fine-tune it.
Right. All TV shows used to be this way.
It was still today. Still today. And in the radio as well. So if you're making a pilot, the good thing is once you have it, you can listen to it. Now, something that everybody does is people, and I will do this, I will say, well, I don't want to listen to it because I don't like the sound of my voice. Right? But you have to detach yourself from who you're listening to, which is yourself, and you listening to it. So you're trying to listen to it, detach yourself from it, and go, you can criticize yourself. I don't like who's this guy? This is horrible, right? And if you detach yourself, you can do a much better job in fine-tuning it. Also, like I said at number 4, have somebody who's soundboard with you, who joins you at the same time if you're uncomfortable listening to your own voice. And then you can make those changes.
All right. Like a practice call, a Zoom
Well,
call.
it's a practice, and you're doing a practice, you're doing a dry run, and it's to fix anything that may not work. And things that work on, okay, we're going to keep that in. This we're going to keep in. This works. This part doesn't so much. It's a little bit slow. There's no feeling for it.
Right.
We cut that out, try to think of something else.
All right. Well, I use Zoom in my interviews. What are your thoughts on Zoom?
Zoom. Well, it depends. Myself, okay, I do use Zoom, for example, but this will sound strange. I use Zoom, but I don't use Zoom. Do you know what I mean by that?
It's not your first choice.
No, that's not that. I will do something which is called, more often than not, a double ender.
Double
A
ender.
double ender. Common radio phrase that's still used today.
All right.
And also used in television. Let's take a break and we'll.
Well, tell you what, we're going to talk about the double ender in our next episode, and we're going to do the additional 5 points.
That's a good teaser, isn't it? Double ender.
A double ender. Sounds a little dangerous. Thanks for joining us at Fantastic Formosa, Joh Abrams, and my guest, Keith Perron. And we'll do another segment here on the following 5 of 10 points on creating your own Substack or podcast or whatever you want to call it. Thanks for joining us.